14th Finance Commission and Chairman, High Power Committee for the Redressal of Regional Imbalances in Karnataka, and the panel of speakers, Professor Sebastian Morris, Chair, Goa Institute of Management, Professor Stanu R. Nair, Indian Institute of Management, Kozhikode, Professor Sachidananda Mukherjee, National Institute of Public Finance and Policy, Professor Ms. Maria Simone, Federal Attorney, Minister of Finance, Government of Brazil, and KG Narendranath from Financial Express on DICE. The second plenary session of the International Conference on Rethinking Public Finance for Emerging Development Challenges, jointly organized by Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation and the Madras School of Economics. This session, titled Evolving Issues and Future Directions in GST Reform in India, holds special significance as we come together to deliberate on the pressing challenges of GST implementation, its evolving framework, and the necessary reforms to enhance its effectiveness. Finally, I take this opportunity to welcome all distinguished professors, scholars, students, and participants who have joined us today to contribute to this crucial discourse. Let me just outline the guidelines first. The chair of the session will introduce the speakers and the topic. The speakers of the session may kindly take 8 to 10 minutes. The discussion initiator may kindly summarize the points and may take 6 to 8 minutes for that, after which you can open the floor for the discussion. We request all of you to follow the time for the smooth conduct of the session. With that, I once again extend a warm welcome to you all and invite the chair of our session to formally commence the proceedings. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me at the outset thank the Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation, and in particular, Dr. K.M. Joseph, for um, asking me to commit this sin of being here, because I made a mistake of mentioning last time in the Madras School of Economics that the conference on public finance could be done together with with the Gulati Institute. And so I have to. So since I am the sinner, I have to have to carry on. And thank you very much for inviting me for this. Um, we have something like four or five speakers, and um, in fact, somebody is also from Brazil. I don't know whether online, and Sachidananda Mukherjee from the NFPFP will also be online, and I am told Professor Krishna is not available, so I will have to carry on. We have Professor Sebastian Morris from Goa Institute of Management, and we have Stanu Nair from IIM Kozhikode. We have Abraham Ryan, IRS. He's not coming. Okay. Then we have Maria Simeon, Federal Attorney, Minister of Finance in Brazil. And Shri Kiran Narendranath will be the from the Financial Express. He will be the session coordinator. I'm sorry, he will be the discussion initiation. So let me welcome all of you to this very interesting session. Already there have been some sparks that were flying earlier, and we have been talking about this. So, in fact, we will be talking more about this in this session. One is yeah. Um, we have actually introduced the goods and services tax from July 1st, 2017 with the fond with great hopes. But it has not turned out to be not the, turned out to be quite the money machine that we thought it would be. In fact, the effective rate of tax, if you take sort of private consumption plus government consumption as the base, effective rate of tax is oscillating anywhere between 10 to 10.5%. And, which basically means it has been, in terms of the rate, it has not really picked up as yet. Um, it suffers from narrow base. Part of the reason is that, in fact, it has a very long list of exemptions. I was told that at the time they devised it, 50% of the items that go into the consumer price index were exempted from the GST base. Then you don't have, you have excluded petroleum products, electricity, and real estate from the GST, and you're taxing at least petroleum products separately as an excise. Then um, so you have multiple rates. You have, apart from exemptions, you have 4 different rates, plus a number of, sort of cesses. I mean, in fact, the cesses and surcharges at varying rates. In addition to that, there is a lot of compounding of things. For example, um, real estate, sort of houses, which used to be taxed at a much higher rate, even the affordable houses. Now you have compounding sort of a levy, which means that you can't get rid of the input tax. You can't take the input tax credit. So you have multiple rates, which creates a lot of problems in terms of classification. You know, there have been, from time to time, there have been discussions. Now the question is whether a donut should be classified as a good that is sold by the restaurant, or it's sold in a bakery. I mean, that's the type of thing that we have. And so you have 30 different laws, because each state has its own law. Now, broadly, they are similar, but at the same time, the interpretation can be different in different states. So you have a large number of court cases pending. And then, since you have, there are only, before India, there were only 3 countries in the world which had the subnational type of GST. That was, Canada, European Union, and Brazil. I mean, experts called it good, the bad, and the ugly. And the problem is that in all these places, exports are zero rated. Whereas in our case, we said we will have a clearinghouse mechanism by having what is called the separate GST, separate CGST, SGST, and IGST. And that requires a much stronger technology platform. And technology platform did not settle for quite some time. And there was a technology audit by the Controller and Auditor General after 2 years, in 2019, which basically said that they were not even able to clear the IGST in a proper manner. And they actually used, for the first year, the Finance Commission's tax devolution formula to do that. I mean, in fact, that was the type of problem that was created. It is settling down, but still there are problems because of the multiple rates. And uh, and the other important thing is, usually when you talk about the GST, the focus is, so the emphasis that you should focus on whales rather than minnows. When you have, I mean, if you really look at, in fact, in Karnataka, unfortunately, GST network doesn't give us the data. From Karnataka data, if you see, the people with less than 50 lakh turnover constitute 92% of the taxpayers, and their tax payment is about 9%. So that's that on the turnover is about 12%, tax payment is about 9%. If this is the type of thing, I mean, you are unnecessarily focusing on the small fellow rather than the whales. And in fact, McKean in his seminal paper basically says that is the way you can actually, keeping threshold reasonably high is the way in which you can actually, fulfill the objective of equity rather than going on exempting, items. But anyway, these are some of the things. So the major thing is we need to move to the second stage of reform now. Possibly one of the things that they have to do is minimize the exemptions and then get rid of, sort of consolidate the tax rates. In fact, as I mentioned, the two, 12 and 18% rate in Karnataka, give you 75% of the revenue. And 28% gives about 15%, and 5% gives about 10%. If one does I'll finish. If one looks at the thing, possibly, sort of, it is possible to merge 12 and 18 into somewhere about 16, and similarly get rid of the 28% altogether, because even cement, which is you have a downstream labor intensive construction industry, but then you want to fix it at 28%. So you get rid of that and then increase the 5% to 7%. That may work out to be a revenue neutral, but then somebody has to do a serious work on that. Possibly the Ministry of Finance will have to do that. And they don't have a research team, unfortunately. So with this, let me say, so we have a very exciting sort of issues to be discussed. So let me invite um, Professor Sebastian Maurice first. Open your presentation. Sorry. Is there a mic or something?
Okay, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here. My thanks to Joseph and to the GIFT, to the Institute for inviting me here. And yeah, and yeah. So let me just go ahead and kindly stop me when if I exceed the time, give me a warning and so on. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about is GST in the context of the challenge of Vikasit Bharat. Now, what I'm saying is that the target for Vikasit Bharat, that means to become a developed status, implies crossing over from the middle income barrier. And it's not for nothing that most countries have been trapped in the middle income barrier. Most notably, the Latin American states, many of them had per capita income ahead of Southern Europe and perhaps, and certainly the East Asian economies, but they came from behind and over, this these middle income. And it's very doubtful if India will be able to penetrate the middle income barrier, whatever it is. The growth rates that are required now to achieve that by 1947 keep increasing, and now it's well above 8%. Yeah. So it's in the context of growth that I'm talking about. To plod along at 5.5% and forever remain in the middle income is not a challenge at all. And therefore, pardon me if I don't refer to those things. Okay. Yeah. So fiscal, no, actually, it's very important to understand that India is a unitary state, but the unitary state has sustained itself, given the subnationalities, because it has evolved towards a near federation, at least fiscally, thanks to the great efforts which have been made in the form of the Finance Commission, the Planning Commission, and so on. Those institutional mechanisms, and over a period, these have been strengthened and so on. Okay? And I think that is extraordinarily important. A lot of the vertical transmission or the vertical transfer issues have been discussed, and we will not be able to sustain this fiscal federalism such that the unitary state is sustained if there is a built-in asymmetry, first of all, between the center and the states and between the states. And it's a between the states that I come to. See, if you really look at uh, you know, the Finance Commission transfers, they have been based on this income per capita income gap largely, and obviously population as a base. So it's essentially a transfer from the so-called rich states, productions, many of whom happen to be production states, to the poor states. Now, the interesting point is they have not been, yeah, yeah, okay, they have not been win-win. Okay, they've not been win-win in the sense that when these massive transfers are made to the poorer states, the expectation is that if proper governance and other processes are in place, they would grow faster than the average for the economy, and therefore ultimately the gap would reduce and they will come of age. And I think every state in India has this mandate to grow and catch up with, let's say, Maharashtra, Gujarat, or Kerala, or whatever are the richer states. Uh, but this is not noticeable. This is in sharp contrast to China, where the massive fiscal transfers have resulted in growth of the interior, which were the earlier, you know, relatively poorer states. Now, the coping mechanism for this continued gap in actual it has been migration, and particularly with the resulting inward remittances. That means Bihar and so on getting money from, say, Kerala and Gujarat is actually making them cope up. Okay. Now, this is not the best way of coping up because it results in massive, loss to, let us say, the quality of life. Nowhere in the world are so many workers separated from their families as is the case in India. Migration is a very important aspect today of our industrialization. Okay. Yeah. Now, the context of high growth is 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 very important to keep in mind when we discuss the fiscal side, because in the context of high growth, it's certainly fiscal consolidation where the fiscal deficit is manageable, and a much larger role for the private sector than what is currently on, and as was originally envisaged in the early days of the reform. Now, the reason why I'm saying a much larger role for the private sector is because the government is quite, I would not just say inefficient, but it's incapable in many ways. Public service delivery, except in certain states, is very pathetic. And we all know this, that just putting money onto governments, particularly municipalities, is not going to work. Many of the designs are about as wrong as they can be. Most metros, for instance, we know are going to be unviable, except perhaps the Delhi metro, and so on. I mean, one has written elsewhere on these matters on infrastructure. It's no longer true that the infrastructure spending is going to be good. However, even then, it demands that fiscal profligacy is not there, and therefore, we know that the federal structure will come under pressure. Now, I'll come to my main point, which is GST is a consumption-oriented tax, and hence the accrual towards destinations was expected. And if you actually look at the data, it has been very significant shift in favor of the consumption states. And what I'm more interested in is against the production states. And given the target of Vikasit Bharat, we need to empower and further the locational competition between state governments so that they can attract industries. Okay. And that has been weakened from the fiscal side, because the increasing part of the taxes which are generated are going to the consumption states, and that's what I will now show. Yeah. So I'll yeah yeah. So the point that I'm trying to make is that a lot of the uh, spending has been to support consumption, okay, uh, rather than result in greater investments. I don't know. Yeah, I think yeah. Rather than to support greater investment and therefore to pick up the growth rate. Okay. Yeah. So the first thing I'll point out is that you know many things are required. Now I won't talk about rationalization of rates because everybody has talked about it. But there are huge cross-referencing of chapters, many transcendental rates. That means conditional, who's using one chapter referring to the other chapter, based on ingredient rather than the product, input, assume preferences rather than by good or service, branding versus non-branding. Certain sectors are omitted. Then there is a huge non-tradable goods which are subject to administered pricing, electricity and so on, where because there is no tax-based differential pricing, what happens is that on account of energy, there is a huge lack of competitiveness of Indian industry, because many of the non-traded goods are priced very high for industry, water being a good example, and you can't get a zero vatting of that. Now, these are known, so I won't discuss that. I'll just discuss mostly the destination orientation. Now, it was known that the revenue neutral rate for the states when the GST was put in place would be very high for the production states. And indeed, it has proved to be that. Now, ample evidence that this redirection of taxes to destination states has taken place. Okay. So I'll skip this on the foreign versus Deshi is a kind of, a kind of be in the bonnet of the tax authorities. So cakes and biscuits are treated as luxury. Marble and granite versus other stone, higher taxes, and so on. One just needs to sit down and you can find 100 such stories. Now, here is a simple, analysis of the post-settlement. That means the IGST uh, being IGST being collected by the center and post-settlement. So, if I look at the May 23rd, May 23 and May 24, just the months, then I find that many states, okay, have a mere 1.4. That is, the IGST only adds 40% to the total SGST which was originally collected. Okay, and these are the production states which you can see in the beginning. But for some other states, most notably the big ones, I'm not talking about the smaller Northeast and so on, those are understandable. But if you look at, say, Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Rajasthan, these states particularly, the value jumps up to 2.4. Okay, that means they're getting 1.4 more if they collect 1 rupee of SGST as coming from the IGST. Now, this is much before any fiscal finance commission or anybody comes in through the IGST mechanism, which means the destination orientation is getting embedded in such a sharp way that, let's say, a guy buys a car in Lucknow, the entire huge tax that he pays on it, uh, that he pays goes to Lucknow and nothing to the entire production chain. Gujarat, which produces that car, will get nothing. Okay? So this is clear from this data. 2 minutes, yeah, fine. Yeah. Okay, so this is clear. And some of the other states, okay, sorry. Yeah. See, there are some states like Bihar, okay, and you can't see this, where the ratio is as high as 3. Okay. Now, if you do a regression of this is not just GST, this is not just IGST, but of the tax which the states get back from the center, okay, and regress it on state GDP with these dummies, what you find again is the same pattern. Okay, so I won't go into the details, but there are certain states which have a huge negative, and you can see the negative sign. These are mostly the production states, and there are a huge set of states which have a positive sign relative to the difference which I have made is Andhra Pradesh. Okay, so which means that again through another piece of data, the production states are being discriminated. Okay, and yeah, okay, yeah. Now this is from one of the colleagues who would be coming on from S. Mukherjee. Okay, and all I've done is I've again reworked one of his tables. And again, you can see the huge discrimination or the huge loss for the production states, particularly Haryana, Gujarat, Telangana, in relation to Rajasthan, Uttar Pradesh, and Bihar. Okay. And this is the change in the SGST to GDP over a certain period, and that shows the same kind of phenomena. Okay. Yeah. So the point I'm trying to make is, it's generally believed that our growth is okay, but that's not true. See, if you look at, for instance, here, the capital in the index of industrial production for capital goods, it has not even reached the level of the pre-COVID levels. Okay, if you take the again consumer durables, it has not reached that. So the claim that so again, if you look at this is a well-known curve. Uh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, if you look at the gross capital formation rate in India, it's way below what is adequate. It was about 35%, 36%, which is ideal for India to grow at 7, 8 plus, But now it has come down much lower to about 30%. And private investment, which has simply not picked up. And the reason I can see is not so much because of fiscal consolidation, because fiscal consolidation is fine, but it's because of the uncertainties let loose, particularly by the central government in terms of policy flux. And that has hurt private investment. In my own discussion with lots of chambers of commerce and industry, this comes through. Okay. Now, again, the investment in projects is plateauing off. It's barely rising. Okay. The capital spend and the revenue spend is also plateauing off. But most importantly, what you can see is that the employment has remained practically and the wage rates have also remained constant, and the employment has barely caught up with the level previously. Now, when you mix it with the unemployment is not reliable because there's a huge movement in the labor force participation. But if you take focus on employment properly, okay, and the employment has fallen before the COVID crisis, dipped, recovered, but it has not reached anywhere near the original level. Okay? So the employment remains a problem, and real wages have been stagnant from 2014 onwards, without exception. Uh, you can see that. And now, the economic survey makes a claim that we have caught up with not only the level pre-COVID, but with the trend. Okay. And this is based on a faulty analysis, which I must mention, which is to linearly project the GDP data after, deseasonalizing it for the period from 2011 onwards to 2019. Now, when you do a linear projection, you know that underlying GDP is always exponential. So that's not on. You should do a log transform and then do a linear or fit an exponential model. And when you do that, the claim that we have caught up with on the trend line with the pre-COVID is completely wrong. We are nowhere near it. And if you do it sector by sector, except in one small sector or so, we have not really caught up anywhere. Okay, so when you do it like this, the red line is what the economic survey has done, the purple line is the correct one, and you'll realize that there is a gap. Okay, similarly, here there is a gap on, I think, yeah, on trade as well. Okay, on trade, not just manufacturing where it's well known. Okay, yeah. So if you kind of put this all together, yeah, if you here again, this is on agriculture. Agriculture is one area where it has done better. Okay. But if you put and simply use a very approximate way of calculating the employment deficit, then it's of the order of 4 to 5 million actually. Okay. So in a sense, we have plodded on at 5 to 6, but not at really 7%. Okay. So I'll leave it here and I'll say that the fiscal consolidation is important, but it's also important and it's equally important to restore the incentive back to the production states so that they can engage in locational tournaments. The other states are not interested. They don't seem to be going anywhere despite talk. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
May I now invite Professor Stanu Nair?
A very good evening to all of you. At the outset, let me thank Guwahati Institute of Finance and Taxation and Madras School of Economics and their heads, Dr. K.J. Joseph and Dr. N.R. Bhanumurthy, for giving me this opportunity to talk on this topic. In fact, it's kind of a homecoming for me because actually I'm a doctorate in public finance, right? And Dr. Bhanumurthy, Dr. K.J. Joseph, and Govinda Rao sir, all were my superstars, right? When I was doing my PhD. So I was basically taking a lot of right insights from them, right? When I was a young doctoral scholar, right? At Madras School of Economics. But unfortunately, I landed at IIM Kozhikode, right? So as Professor Sebastian Morris knows, business schools are more about corporate finance or private finance, right? So their students and the faculty or none of us are interested in government finance, public finance. So basically, I was in a different world, and suddenly I got a PhD student, right? Her name is Pooja Bhatia. So she was the only one. She told me that I'm interested in doing research in public finance. Okay, so then I again came back to public finance, right? In between, so I'm here, right? So I will basically liberally use some of the findings from our thesis, right, to drive home the core thesis, right, of my talk today. Okay, so we all know that in the contemporary world, right, the taxation has become a very hot topic of discussion, especially after 2014 and after the introduction of GST. Most importantly, in my view, unlike in the past, today public, especially taxpayers, they are very much aware of, right, the taxation related issues. And today everyone talks about, what the kind of taxes they pay, right, and their tax burden. And importantly, the fellow citizens tax burden, right? Everybody tries to compare, right? How much I am paying, how much others are paying. And most importantly, people have started talking about, right, what I'm getting from the government, right, in return for taxes which I pay. And this is very much evident if you look at the debates in the social media, and especially if you look at the YouTube videos, right, on taxation related issues. And if you go to the comment sections, you will find that, I mean, how much people are aware of, I mean, or unaware of, right, the taxation related issues. And interestingly, these YouTube channels or new age expert. Now today, everyone is an expert, right, in taxation and economy. So they all actually come out with videos explaining, right, the tax issues, which are, I mean, very much easily relatable to the tax people or common public. Sorry. And unlike economies, right, I mean, we normally complicate the things, and due to which basically taxpayers find it difficult to understand different concepts. But these young YouTubers, right, they basically explain different aspects of taxation, and sometimes they give a lot of misinformation about the tax, right? But anyway, people are very much aware of the debates and issues, and that is very much evident from, right, debates like related to, like, the GST on cream bun, right? You all know, right? Some viral videos, and GST on popcorn, the latest one being, right, GST on donut, right? So everybody discuss about GST these days, and which means that the common public are becoming more conscious, and which means governments also need to be very careful, because unlike in the past, people started asking questions, right, to the government, that okay, what I am getting in return, right, if I pay taxes. So this is very much evident. I don't know how many of you have listened to this interview by Honorable Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, when journalists asked now what feedback you are getting from the Indian middle class about your budgets. So she replied by saying that we are paying too much. This is what she said, middle class is telling the government. We are paying too much tax. Give us our money back. And that is the kind of feedback I'm getting. We are paying tax. We are not getting enough back. Okay. So coming to the discussion here, that GST, and we all know that GST was implemented in 2017, and with a lot of expectations, especially, the idea was to simplify the tax system, right, increase the tax revenue, right, and make things easier for the businesses, right, and the common public. But even after 7.5 years, I think most of us are not very much happy with the GST system, right? And the issues like no the complexity of tax structure, large number of rates, exemptions, large number of exceptions, high complaints cost, right? Cumbersome dispute resolution mechanism, lack of transparency, right? Impartiality in tax administration, complex auditing process, tax evasion, different tax laws, as Professor Govindra has pointed out, right? So these issues are highlighted even today. In fact, when I was doctoral student, and I used to hear the same issues when sales tax was there, and when I became a young faculty, I used to hear the same complaints about the value-added tax. Today, I'm hearing the same, right, complaints related to GST. So it means that the problem is the systemic problems, they still remain, right? And when it comes to the revenue which we fail to resolve, but when to revenue productivity, yes, still issues still remain even after implementation of GST, right? India's tax to GDP ratio, I mean, is still low. And when I compare the tax to GDP ratio of India after we introduced extensive tax reforms from 1992, the average comes to around 15.72, which is slightly higher than, I mean, the uh, pre-extensive reform, the tax reform, it's mild tax reform period from 1974 to 1991. That is, before that we initiated some mild reforms. So this was from only from 14.05 to 15.72, which is not that great. Okay, if you compare the reforms, the kind of reforms we have initiated. And everybody knows that India's tax to GDP ratio is much lower compared to Western world, except Dr. Sujit Balla. I mean, Professor in the morning session, Professor Ashok Lira has rightly pointed out. Except him, I think most of us, right, we know that India's tax to GDP ratio compared to the world is low. For example, if you look at the OECD countries, their tax to GDP ratio is 34%, but whereas India, right, if you look at the latest statistics, is only 11.7, which is lower than, right, even the emerging countries. Okay. So the point is, uh, people say that tax burden is very high, but government says that I need money, right, for development, right? But people do not want to pay tax, right, including GST, right? Everybody complains about that. And in fact, when we did a survey among the income taxpayers, as part of research which my PhD scholar did, we found out that 61.86% of the survey, in respondents, they felt that tax burden in India is very high. Okay, that's a perception people are having. And the point is, we can't find fault of the government because government needs money. So the point is, why the revenue productivity of Indian tax system is low, right? In spite of doing all these reforms, and again we go back to the same issues, same problems like tax structure is an issue, and this, exemption is an issue. Again, we blame the structural part. But the point is, why are we not talking about the behavioral part of the tax base? Okay, in the sense, okay, we have done enough in the structural side, right? And it's again work in progress even today, right? Even after 35 years of tax reforms, it's even, work in progress. But what about the behavioral aspect of the tax base? Why? We are not focused on that. I just want to briefly touch upon that. So when you talk about behavioral aspects, basically, uh, we talk about what is called tax morale. Okay, what is tax morale, right? It simply refers to the intrinsic motivation of the citizens to pay tax. This means that instead of having an incentive for you to evade tax, right, and then individually prosper, right, and if you come forward and pay taxes, right, and then it means that you have high tax morale. Okay, in the sense you want to contribute to tax revenue and you pay, right, in spite of, right, complaining about the system, in spite of having opportunities, right, to escape tax burden, right, tax, payment, right. Still, if you want to, if you pay, come across and pay, then I think that actually is a different situation. So that we refer using the concept tax morale. And it is nothing but no, the taxpayers' moral sentiments towards tax payment. And it explains, right, the fact that, okay, even if there is a loophole, people still want to pay tax. And this aspect is India's highly ignored, right? And especially when we looked at a survey called World Value Survey data, right? I don't know how many of you are aware of. They basically measure the tax morale of Indian citizens by asking a simple question: cheating on taxes if you have a chance. Okay, please respond. So this survey, when we analyzed, it clearly showed that India's tax morale of the citizens of India has come down from 1991 to 2005, right? From, we have used some calculations, okay, from 2.61 to 1.90, okay. And then it again increased, between 2005 and 2014, right, to uh, uh, yeah, okay, to 2.55, which means even after increase, from 2005 to 2014, it's still the level of tax morale is right at the level of 1991. The question here is, right, why tax morale are saying not increased, right? And we did a survey, right, among the young taxpayers, and then we did some regression analysis. What we found was basically in India, uh, people, right, who are young, it's a very interesting result. Young population, they have less tax morale compared to old taxpayers. So if you ask any no young generation today, right, everybody wants to fly out of India and settle, right? And everybody thinks that India is not a good place because they are not actually getting the kind of facility, right, which they want, like, right, Europe and other countries, right? So if I ask, any course, any of my students, they say, we want to go abroad because here, even after I pay tax, right, we are not getting enough facilities, right? So why am I paying tax? Right. So which means young population has less tax morale, and rich, that is people who have money, rich middle class, right, and middle class, they have less tax morale compared to poor, right? And we also found that people who basically believe in the government, the trust in government, right, they basically have, the prejudice to pay more taxes. And people who believe that, right, public spending in India is inefficient, right, and they think that, tax among them, right, tax morale is less. And people who think that corruption is very high, right, and they think that, their tax morale among them is very low, right? And then we did several other analysis, like, we asked public, right, what do you think about the efficiency of public spending in India? We found out that, many majority, they felt that it is low. And then we asked, right, what is your level of confidence about the central government and state government? And actually, level of confidence is less, but interestingly, the confidence on central government is slightly higher than states. And we asked about, right, your level of satisfaction regarding the public services in India, and we found out that that's quite low. And we asked them about the level of confidence in the legal system, political system, right, and police, right. In fact, we found that the confidence is very low. And this we found when we surveyed around 1,000, I think, 8,000, over 1,000 samples, right, across India, covering taxpayers. Okay, the point here is that at the end of the day, I mean, if you want, I mean, to people to pay taxes, right, instead of doing all these reforms, right, then thing is that there should be, right, governance, right? I mean, today afternoon there was one paper presented by, I think, uh, Jerome Joseph and Kiran Kumar, right, from GIFT. They in fact found that, right, uh, in states where governance is better, they are able to collect more tax revenue. In a way, I think they are supporting, right? I mean, this is which I proposed, right? Which means that government should focus more on governance part and how to make best use of taxpayers' money, right? And today in the morning session, right, Professor Ashok clearly pointed out some examples. And when I see around me, right, I mean, wherever I see there is something, wherever I see there's only government failure, right? Projects are not completed properly, they are not implemented properly, and no facility is not given, right? And there is not a good transport system, right? And which means that, I mean, the overall public service delivery is quite low in India. So lesson here could be that, I mean, the government should focus more on governance and public service delivery, and most importantly, I mean, how best I can make use of taxpayers' money, and that in a way is thing, I mean, should be the focus of, right, governments today. Of course, I mean, the structural reform should continue, but when that happens, right, this side of the, reform happens, definitely, right, I think people will be, more willing to pay taxes. I mean, that's what we found, right, from my research. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sananaya. Let me now invite my old colleague Sachidananda Mukherjee. Sachidananda Mukherjee is the professor at National Institute of Public Finance and Policy. And in fact, we were colleagues for a number of years later, 10 years. And he's essentially an environmental economist, but then he's an accidental public finance man now. So he's an accidental economist in public finance. Sachidananda, please start your time starts now.
Respected Dr. Rao, and I must admit that this baptism to public finance has done by you. You are the sinner. So you have turned me to public finance, I won't say that specialist, but public finance, student of public finance by you only. Thank you, sir. And I also want to thank all of you, those who are present today afternoon in the auditorium of GIFT, because I was there 1 week before there, and that time I thought that I should come to attend this conference, but I could not come. So I will start with a positive note of goods and services tax, because today I heard that there are so much of negative things about goods and services tax. Please remember that there is a time, there is a tax shopping, interstate tax shopping, and that was eroding the tax base of the states. And even Professor Thanumurthy is there, and his PhD thesis actually on tax topic that he has done in Madras School of Economics. So right now, I want to say that majority of the states are facing tax shopping related to diesel, and that is brought from other states at a lower rate from the state where actually it is consumed. So destination-based tax principle that is inculcated in the GST regime is benefiting the states where the consumers are located, because they are paying the tax to get the public services. The tax should not be there where the actually income is generated, manufacture is done. They are getting the income and they will consume. And most of the states are consuming, producing states are doing very well in GST collection. So it's not that the narrative that the producing states are losing in the battle of GST collection is not true. So I also want to comment on many things that why it is narrow base, plethora of exemptions, multiple rate structure, and threshold versus registration. But before that, let me start with my 3 slides that I have prepared. I want to highlight on 3 slides. I hope that you can see my slides, or just I'll share my slides. Yes. Uh, so I hope you can see my slides. So the thing is that I want to highlight 3 points in the GST that is bothering me or any of us. That one thing is the rate rationalizations, and the second thing is basically revenue sustainability of the state governments, and the third thing is the tax evasion. Now, simplification of the GST rate structure is difficult at this juncture because of the reason that this rate rationalization will have uh, differential revenue impact across the states. So as Dr. Rao mentioned, that the different states have different basket of revenue. So take example of how much the tax is collected from 5%, how much is collected for 12%, 18%, and 28%. This varies according to the consumption pattern of the state. So if you want to change this rate structure, then there will be a differential revenue impact across the states. How big is that? How small is that? I don't know, because in absence of any data, GST related data is a hurdle to do any policy research in India. So there's hardly any, if I have done around 5-6 states research, and I have found that there's a substantial differences across states in the basically the rate-wise tax collection. So that's one point I want to highlight here. And the second point that I want to highlight, that why we have the differential rate structure in India. Mainly the thing is that to make it progressive. And I must admit that Indian GST system is progressive. Even with the household consumption expenditure survey 22-23, I have estimated that the Indian, both for the rural and urban areas, Indian GST system is progressive. And the second thing that I want to highlight is that our commodity basket, even each commodity, is very heterogeneous. I want to say that it's not like developed country that one thing is serving all the population. No, one biscuit packet is 5 rupees and another biscuit packet is around 50 rupees in India. So we have very different very heterogeneous kind of commodity to serve, and basically different consumer goods have consumers having income inequality. So keeping in mind, either you have to tax it or you have to exempt it. So exemption basket, around 50% of our consumption basket is attracting maximum tax rate of 5%. Majority of them are exempted and another is attracting 5% tax rate. That's the situation we have now. And the consolidation of the GST rate structure to 2 to 3 rates is desirable. Then we need to have the price-based rate fixation should be removed, removal of marketing or physical features of the commodities that Professor Morris has mentioned, that like the packaging, labeling, and the made of the product like utensils, that we have to remove, and that may not have much revenue impact for the state government as well for the union government. Second issue that I want to highlight is that how to ensure the state GST collection at least at the level of that is equivalent to the revenue that is subsumed into the GST in the base year 2015-16. Because except Maharashtra and northeastern state, none of the states without GST compensation could meet the GST GSDP ratio, which was there in 2015-16. Now, Maharashtra, why they have done it? So, Professor Rao has mentioned about the narrow base. And consumption is not the only base of GST. We have to also think about that lots of public expenditure on infrastructure, mainly roads, ports, then the other kind of things where input tax credit, because they are not producing any output which is taxable. So input tax credit is not adjustable or allowed. This is the base for GST collection. So the Maharashtra, if you see, the large scale infrastructure projects have taken up for the last 5 to 10 years. So they are collecting more GST on input side, but they don't have to give the input tax credit. So that's why that they collect the more revenue. And the northeastern states, what happened that the being consuming state, and previously the VAT system, they didn't have any kind of system to collect taxes. So what happened that after the GST introduction, the central government presence in terms of tax collection is there in the northeastern states, so they are collecting revenue there. So that is the one thing that I want to highlight. Now, if the state government to sustain the revenue stream, which is subsumed into the GST, then we have to think of continuation of the GST compensation cess collection and have a mechanism to transfer the resources to the state. Now, what will be the design of that thing? Whether it will be a concurrent tax rate, it will be a union tax, either it will be a state tax or it will be a concurrent tax, either we package it as a sin tax, health tax, carbon tax, that's a different issue, it's a design and issue. But we have to think of giving compensation or giving some mechanism, both the central government and the state government, because central government is also collecting lots of cesses from the custom side and also union excise duty side, mainly to compensate the revenue loss that they have suffered on account of GST collection. So we have to think of that thing. And the last point I want to mention about the tax evasions. Tax evasion is rampant in the GST system, and it has all happened in the organized system as a systematic way of tax evasion. And I must admit that in our present era of tax administration, just 1 minute, sir, I'll take. So I want to mention that tax administration has lost the control over deterrence, basically how the tax is collected. So it's all paper trails, all the computer, all the digital public finance data and all these things, they don't know how the tax is evaded. So that administration that requires investment, political willingness, and also they have to have a physical presence in the field to collect the taxes. Dr. Rao always mentioned that the roving bandits thing, because we need to introduce more roving bandits in tax administration to collect taxes. Thank you very much, and I'd be happy if you have any question, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Satchidananda. Let me now invite Ms. Let me now invite Ms. Maria Simeon, Federal Attorney, Ministry of Finance, Government of Brazil. I'm sure this is a not a good time in the morning, early in the morning. So sorry that we have to wake you up and then, make a presentation. We'd like to invite you for the presentation. Thank you.
Hi.
Yeah, please. Please go ahead.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me. And I will be showing you the vision of an outsider from Brazil. And our countries have so much in common. But let me start by saying thank you to Professor KG and to this awesome Kerala crew. And thank you so much for having me. So I will start giving you some numbers about India and Brazil. And the title of my presentation is India and Brazil, A Path to Greatness. Because there are only 5 countries on the planet with GDP higher than $2 trillion and with more than 100 million people living on more than 2 million square kilometers. And that's the US, China, Russia, India, and Brazil. So there is definitely a path to greatness for India and Brazil. And the tax reform, both for India and Brazil, are one step in that path to greatness, because both countries had those very complicated systems with cascading taxes, and they had to adopt a standard system that could be easily recognizable for investors and venture capital and capital that is flowing to India and Brazil. So India started in 2017. Brazil is on its way. And I want to focus on 3 aspects of the Indian tax reform here. First, it seems very progressive because I revisited the list of items that are exempt and have those different rates. And India has a very good list of exemptions for food, even for items like children's books, which is necessary. It's necessary to protect your middle class. The middle class is the beauty of a society. It's the creative core of an economy. The middle class is the core, the heart of innovation. So it must be protected. Of course, you should protect the poor and the middle class. So I think you have a very extensive, good list of exemptions, and it should remain that way. I don't think that a cashback system for the poor would be a good idea for India, because you would be compensating the poor, but you would miss that ascending middle class that is so important for the energy, the economic energy of your society. You should protect the middle class. So the second point is the legal concept of GST, that it's not identical, but it's very close to the European VATs and the Australian, South Korean VATs. There are some differences in the Indian GST, but it's very close. So there is this framework that is easily recognizable, that's very good for investment, because capital will meet this familiar framework. So it was great for economic efficiency and great for investment and attracting capital. And the third point that is a very positive point is the TI backbone that was ready and solved. You nailed it. That interface between government and the taxpayers. So that was a great point. But every tax system, it's not a work of art. It's never finished. So it keeps evolving, and it should be that way. The tax reform is something that is permanent. It's a work in progress. It will never end. And you still have big challenges, and it will always be that way. So I do think that the system should go for radical simplification. You should simplify. You have lots of rates. Maybe India should be just like other countries like Switzerland, who has this list of exemptions and just one rate for all sectors. That would maximize economic efficiency. So you should have less rates, and you are thinking about lowering the rates, which is great for economic efficiency. When you lower the consumption taxes rates, studies show that you will get a higher GDP and quantify that higher GDP. So that seems to be a very good path to follow. And you still have that great challenge of which is similar in Brazil, of very different states. You have the so-called rich states and the poor states, and you have to help the poor states. So it remains a great challenge for India to solve this challenge through compensations, and I hope it will not bring higher rates and a higher tax burden, because the tax burden in India is very competitive. I was taking a look at your tax burden, 18.5%, that's very competitive. So there will be this temptation of the state to go for higher rates to have more revenue, because you still have space for higher rates. And I think you should resist, because this is a very competitive tax system, and it's very good for small and medium companies and the middle class. The middle class, that is the beauty of society and should be protected. So I think India is on a very good path with GST, and it really nailed the TI backbone. That system. Brazil is still on its way, because it will start in 2026. So the Brazilian tax reform hasn't started yet. It's not ready yet. The TI backbone is not ready. It's on its way until 2026. But you still have a long way to go with those rates and that difference between the states. I hope you keep that very competitive tax burden and those rates that are low. You have the main rate is 18%, which is still low. It could be, I don't think it should be higher than that. It would hurt the economic growth. And you have countries like Australia and Switzerland, they have a 10% rate, an 8% rate in Switzerland. So you should try to keep it that way to help economic growth. And as for the paradigm of the state, the tax system is part of a big picture. There is the paradigm of the state.
Madam Simeon, you have 2 minutes more.
Okay, I'm finishing. You have this, I think India should, of course, it should not have a minimal state, and it should go for what the so-called smart state that is very efficient with spending, keeping the tax burden competitive. And I see it's doable with an 18% rate. And I think it's a necessary step in your path to greatness to solve that choice, the model of state that you want, and going for a very efficient, smart state and a competitive tax burden and competitive tax rates with very efficient public spending to stimulate the economy and help the middle class and help the poor. So thank you very much for having me. And India, in my eyes, India is the future in Asia. I don't think it's China, I think it's India. It's a great country. Thank you so much for having me.
Madam, let me mention that Brazil has a tax GDP ratio of 33%. And, we are here struggling at 16.5%. What do you think we should do to increase the tax burden, GDP ratio?
His voice was very low. Can you repeat it?
Brazil's tax GDP ratio is 33%. As a ratio of GDP, Brazil raises 33% of revenue total.
The ratio of tax to GDP is, oh, okay. So India still has a surprisingly lower rate. The federal government and the states, it's 18.5%. This is a surprisingly lower rate. And I guess all those countries that are industrial powerhouses like Switzerland, South Korea, and also countries that have a very efficient system like Australia, they are around 27.5%. So you still have a space to have somewhat higher tax GDP ratio, but your tax GDP ratio is very competitive.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your presentation, and I'd like to thank you on behalf of Gulati Institute of Taxation, Finance and Taxation, and Madras School of Economics for giving us the benefit of your views. Thank you. Now let me invite Mr. Narendranath.
At the outset, let me thank the Gulati Institute of Finance and Taxation, Mr. Dr. KJ Joseph, and Dr. Bhanumurthy for giving me this opportunity. Journalists are supposed to be quick in the uptake. We have to comprehend things, very complex things like public finance and taxation. when the government announces a new policy, a new elaborate document at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock in the evening, we are supposed to comprehend it, understand it, decipher it, and then reproduce it for the reader in a way that reader understands it. An average reader, people with an average level of information or intelligence can understand what this is about. So here also, I am given almost the same task. A lot of I am flooded with a lot of information by a variety of speakers on a set of issues regarding GST, public finance, starting with Dr. Govinda Rao, who was a key contributor to public finance and policy maker in the country, also the member of the 14th Finance Commission. So what we were told when the GST was introduced in 2017, in the formative period of that GST introduction, just after state VAT was introduced, there was a lot of discussions and deliberations. There were a lot of central state discussions and sessions. We used to report them, and we were given a promise. And we are also gullible. We are also so we are supposed to be quick in the uptake, but we are also gullible people. So we were told that this is going to be a very epochal tax reform. It will reduce cascading effect of taxes. Tax on tax will not be there. There will be an input tax credit mechanism. So only the final consumer pays the tax. Businesses are supposed to be only a collector of the taxes. And then it will improve economic efficiency. It will lead to some incremental protection. We were told that there will be output effect will be created with this efficient tax. And 8 years, 9 months, now about 8 years after GST introduction, now 7 years, about 9 months have passed. So now we have not seen that output effect being created or incremental tax buoyancy being created. We are talking about the low revenue productivity of GST now. So the GDP, the GST collections to GDP ratio, if you exclude the cess, which was an additional impost, if you strictly compare with the pre-GST taxes which got subsumed in GST, like state VAT, excise duty, service tax, etc. If you suppose what would have been the growth rates of those taxes now and compare the GST rate, GST growth collections now, we see that there is a big gap. So the revenue yield from GST has not happened. GST's revenue productivity is comparable to the pre-GST rates. Even compared with that, even still now it is low. It used to be very low during the COVID years and thereafter. In recent years, it has slightly increased. And every month we have a collection data, 1.8 lakh crore, 1.9 lakh crore. So the government sells it to us saying that, oh, this is a big number. But when we compare with the GDP, it may be 6.9% of GDP, including the cesses in 2023-24. It used to be an average of 6.2% in the 5 years when states used to get a compensation, a guaranteed revenue of 14% annual growth. Now that annual growth, 14% revenue guarantee has gone, there is a demand from states to continue with, again, get their revenue, that compensation. Actually, central government had to borrow money because even the cess proceeds were inadequate to compensate. That itself shows the revenue productivity of GST has not been adequate. Now there is a demand. So the speakers were saying that one of the speakers from NFEFP, Dr. Mukherjee was saying, we may consider maybe an extension of the cess now. Because there was also a talk about subsuming the cesses in the highest GST rate of 28%, which means the effective rate will be around 35%, making it a permanent feature. So that will, when we have a consumption problem in the economy, now if you see the latest GDP data for FY25, the advanced estimate, there is a differential of around 4 percentage points between the GDP growth rate and the private final consumption expenditure growth rate. So where consumption is not good enough to sustain our growth, a higher growth for us, at this point of time, if we ask for kind of another increase in GST rates, as Dr. Mary Simon was mentioning, it is a correct point, because the we cannot now increase the GST rates further. Fortunately, recently there was a remark by the finance minister saying that we will have fewer and lower rates. The rates will be lowered and will be fewer rates. But Dr. Mary was mentioning that the India's differential tax rates, multiple rates, is a kind of progressive one. But at the same time, wherever we have a single rate, in countries where there is a limited number of rates, there is a single standard rate and relatively low rate, a benign rate, we have seen those countries have produced much higher revenue buoyancy. So there is no need to pursue this so-called revenue neutral rate. The revenue neutral rate was estimated at 15 to 15.5% by a committee headed by former Chief Economic Advisor Arvind Subramaniam on a particular base they considered at the point of time. Now, after a large number of rate cuts after that, over 500 items, the rates have come down. Since that, during the COVID period, there were a lot of rate cuts. So now we have a weighted average rate of around 11%. So the differential is around 4% or even higher. So if you pursue that revenue neutral rate, that means there should be higher rates for a large number of items. So what is feasible now in this context? See, GST is more important for states than the center. If you see the center's overall collections, overall inflows into the central exchequer, 18% is GST, if you include all the inflows, including the borrowing. But for states, their own tax revenue, GST is a substantial component, the largest component. And what they get from the center as part of the tax transfers, that is also included. It is an even major thing for states. And in the collective bargain between center and states, during the introduction of GST, the states were initially asking for a more than 50% share. But they have finally been given a 50% share, half equal share as center in the overall GST collections. So there itself states made a kind of a compromise. In order to offset that, states were given this additional this 14% annual growth, the guaranteed growth, which were given to them. That's why they could somehow manage. Now that that is also gone, and GST's overall productivity and GST revenues are not really very strong, and it may not be, I think it is leveling off now. After that COVID period, now in the last 2 years, there is an increase in GST collections, but it seems that it is now leveling off. And with the economy also in a downturn now, there will be a serious problem for the states when it comes to their own resources. So in this context, what is the most feasible idea for in India now? Because the finance minister also talked about bringing down the GST rates. That means that she's not pursuing the revenue neutral rate. So people were talking about the tax to GDP ratio. There's a differential of 8% of tax to GDP ratio. Dr. Vivek Debroy had estimated that now our tax to GDP ratio should at least be 25%. Now we have 18%, around 18%. So around 8 percentage points gap is there. How do we fill this gap? But according to me, what I think is that a benign tax rate with a wider base and minimal exemptions, maybe we may not be ready yet for a single GST rate, but we can have two rates, a standard rate and a merit rate. And then we can have a wider base. The registration threshold can be low only. And then that will lead to increased revenue buoyancy. There will be consumption booster for that. It will be a much bigger consumption booster than the income tax cuts, which will benefit only some 32 million people. There was a talk about one of the panelists saying about the middle class is the beauty of the country. But the Indian real middle class is not the taxpayer. He is a poor man. He cannot even pay tax. If you see the Indian real middle class is not the middle class we are supposed to think. So more than that, we have to have more people in the middle class, and middle class should expand. There is now a concern that the middle class is not expanding, it may be even shrinking. So what is needed for the country now is some other sources of tax revenue. We can talk about the inheritance tax, wealth tax, etc. We have a reduced corporate tax now. So we may not be taxing corporates adequately, I don't know. But we may have other mechanisms where a differential, more progressive taxation. where the really rich people pay tax. And then the GST can be more broader base and with benign rates, so that the low income people are not prevented from becoming, graduating into the middle class and other categories. And then that will lead to much, and more, above all, what I need is that there should be more even distribution of powers between the center, states, and the local governments. There should be increased decentralization. What is happening now is increased centralization in recent years. What is happening now is very clearly increased centralization. And the GST also all in the initial session also, in the introductory session also, the finance minister of Kerala was also mentioning about how the cesses and surcharges were used by the central government in order to usurp a large part of the fiscal space available, and practically the divisible pool has also got limited because of that. And now we have, if you can, for the mandatory transfer from the center, from the tax pool has not been actually to 40 to 41% mandated by the Finance Commission. It was much less if you see the divisible overall gross tax revenue, including the cesses and surcharges. So that means, no, there is the transfer from the center to the states is in various ways, centrally sponsored schemes. So in this context, it is very important for states to get more fiscal powers. States should be they shoulder a larger part of the fiscal responsibility, the expenditure responsibility of the country. They need to spend on education, healthcare, and infrastructure creation. So the central government also should spend on infrastructure creation. So supposedly the center is spending too much on capex now, but if you see the overall public capex, there is a corresponding decrease in the capex of CPSE, Central Public Sector Undertakings, and state governments. So our capital expenditure by the government is also more or less stagnating, even though the media highlights more largely the central government capex when the budget comes. So what is needed now is more decentralization. In the case of GST, I think we may need a broader GST. I don't know about the petroleum products are very important tax revenue source for the states. If it is being included in the GST, that can create some problems for the states. And real estate also, the immovable property, if it is ready-made ones, land and the ready-made buildings are not part of GST. I also told the former the tax planning official, Mr. Arvind Modi. He was recently in an article written for our paper. He was mentioning about the need for what you call the unpaid, the non-fees based financial services. Financial services which are not fees based should also be part of the GST. He was also advocating for a single GST rate, the single GST rate with a broader base on all. But I'm not sure whether the country is ready for that now. We may have two rates, a standard rate, and the weighted average rates can be somewhere around 10%, which will not lead to, according to me, any kind of revenue decrease or revenue growth impact. It will only have a positive impact on growth, because it will stimulate the economy. It will create more revenue generation, tax revenue generation, that the government can invest in both capital expenditure, productive investment, as well as for welfare, which is also a meaningful expenditure. So this is what I think. Basically, our GST structure is very complex, I think, as of now. It is a 6 rates practically, including the precious metals special rate, the exemption rate, the 5%, 12%, 18%, and 28%. And now, additionally, we have the cesses also. So it's very complex things that Govindra was mentioning about. Very minor differentiation, even restaurants, various kinds of services are taxed in different ways. So it's become really complex now. Of course, the tax administration has become more efficient. They are using digital means, third-party information and other things. The administration is becoming more and more efficient, and it is leading to some kind of an impact on the revenue side also. But ultimately, what we need is a structural change, a very serious structural change in the GST. So this is what I think basically. So that is then in the context of this in the integrated GST. Integrated GST is also a question, because actually Dr. Sebastian, the time is up. Yeah, I'm just concluding. Dr. Sebastian Morris was mentioning about the manufacturing states versus consumption states, and a slightly different opinion was given by Dr. Mukherjee on that, saying that manufacturing states are not not losing out in this contest. But I don't know about that, the exact study about that. because Kerala is supposed to benefit as a consumption state. I don't think Kerala has benefited to that extent. So basically, I am concluding by saying that what we need is more decentralization and a broader GST base, and looking for other tax avenues for the government to increase its tax revenue. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lalindra, for your presentation. Now, how much time do we have? Go ahead.
Now, the floor is open for the discussion. Just take a 5 minutes, 2 or 3 questions. Thank you.
That is for the chair to say, please, you don't take over that. Okay, sir, I think I just have a remark for general.
Then I don't have any remarks.
No, I have one. Yeah. I think one general point for all the plenaries, because plenary sessions are generally, we have experts. When we are generally asked to speak an expert, we tend to solve all the problems. But unfortunately, we also have youngsters here. I think I would like all the experts also to say the younger generation, what do we do not know? What are the remaining issues? Because otherwise they may go unemployed. So we have to keep them engaged. Every session should be coming up with issues for further research. So in that context, I was actually just worrying. Recently, the Indian Chartered Accountant Association president, Mr. Nilesh Vakumse, he was here. He was telling me that, look, India's informal sector is growing. He was of the view that he was, no, in terms of not only income, in the broader informal sector activity is expanding. This is, I mean, he won't be saying with the, no, the point I'm trying to say that there is reason to believe that it could happen because we know that we have designed an GST paradigm taking into many of the specificities of Indian context. But we also know that we have a highly informal sector dominant economy, and the dynamics within which the linkage between informal sector and formal sector works, particularly because of the input tax credit claim. It could happen that a fellow before the introduction of GST working with formal sector might be getting excluded from his in connection with the formal sector, because unless the informal sector fellow registers, the formal sector will be able to get the input tax credit. So informal sector will have a choice to join or not to join, register or not to register. A work is going on in this direction. I don't think that anybody. So what is the reflection of the panelists?
No, in fact, there is quite a bit of literature on this. Alan, Joseph Stiglitz and Shahi Imran have 2 papers in Journal of Public Economics, and I think you should read them. Basically, their idea, they are basically arguing, saying that because Shahi Imran is from Bangladesh, basically they are arguing that because of the introduction of value-added tax, the informal sector economy has expanded there, and that was contested. There are papers by McKean. Basically, it's an empirical question. If throughout the entire chain of transactions, if you want to remain in the informal sector, the entire chain of transactions will have to go. If any one chain, one sort of set of transaction comes into the picture, the taxes will have to be paid. But there is work on this, and I think this is, I don't think we can go on discussing this. Very important papers are there. You can read the paper that I had, the 2013 paper by McKean, which will give you all the details. No, I'm sorry. Do you have anything to say? Can I? Yeah, please.
No, I'm not going to continue this discussion on the informal sector. We can discuss that separately. Informal sector is highly labor intensive. The productivity is very low. We had done in the National Commission for Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector 2004 to 2009 an estimation of the output of the informal sector. and the growth of the informal sector. We found that the growth rate of the informal sector was half that of the formal sector in terms of output. If that continues, you can imagine the share of informal sector is continuously decreasing.
No, you are right.
That
No,
is
so
one.
what
That's one. That's one. The second one is I want to ask you, since he said about the younger researchers are there. As Sachidananda Mukherjee has pointed out, why is it so difficult to get access to detailed GST data?
no,
They have granular data, every state, every union territory. And I have also asked the finance minister here. He just said, it's not in our hands. I don't believe that.
Yeah, no, I will answer both the questions. I mean, in fact, point which Professor Joseph made and you made, they are not contradictory. The reason is informal sector may continue to be, I mean, more and more important, and the informal sector may continue to shrink. But the question is whether the GST has had any dampening effect. That is the question. And as I said, it's an empirical question rather than sort of a priori you can't make this. I mean, Joseph Stiglitz and Shah Imran agree that even though so it's an empirical question. And on the other thing, it's should I say bureaucracy or a politician? I don't know. There used to be a gentleman called Hasmukh Adia, who is a revenue secretary in the government. This is off the record. He was a revenue secretary in the government. That's the time when, sort of revenue secretary, the secretary for the GST. That's in 2017, 18. Around that time, someone took some data from the GST network and had a criticism, some sort of a criticism. And he gave a verbal order saying that nobody will share any data from GST network. And that is the dictum. In 2019, I had gone to the GST network and said that I wanted a certain type of data to be, sort of procured. They said that you have to get the permission of the revenue secretary. I was staying for 2 days and I tried to book an appointment with the revenue secretary. And then they gave me an appointment in the afternoon. In the morning, I was called and said that secretary is too busy, you can't meet. So I had to come back because, I don't reside there. And then in the NAPAP governing body meeting, there was the chairman of the Central Board of Excise and Customs. It was an online meeting. I pleaded there saying that, don't kill the messenger. Ultimately, there is no point in killing the messenger. He said that, we are discussing it, we are thinking about it, we will share it. But that is the story. Okay, now the question is, I don't know how to come out of it. In government, when a decision is taken, it's difficult to undo the decision. And nobody dares to do it. It is a political. I don't know who is the decision, but this is what I was told. And you know, Sachidananda mentioned about the data that I was using. Now, I had made it very clear that this data I have taken, this is not for a national data. This data I have taken for Karnataka government. The rate is, sort of revenue. Karnataka is usually a general sort of a state, which is neither extreme. So I am not generalizing from there. I am saying that in Karnataka it is like this. Other states, I think people working in other states should do this work and then say that, look, this is the rate category wise, this thing. This is the turnover wise, this thing. They do have, because after all, SGST is also administered, no? And on the other issue, which Sachidananda raised, that you have public, sort of public, investments, and then there's an input tax. It is like, there are lots of food grains, lot of food items for which you pay the GST on fertilizers and GST on inputs. The point is, so when you when the final product is exempted, I mean, for that reason, when you are saying that total consumption is a tax base, you don't really remove the food item in the system. So it's a broad tax base that one is talking about. If you want to have an exact tax base, then you have to do a much better work on that.
Mr. Chairman. Hello, Mr.
Please go ahead. Yeah. Please go ahead. Yes, Professor Kakwani.
Oh, hi, how are you? In Australia, we have a GST of 10%, almost uniformly on all commodities, hardly any exemptions. So it's a very simple tax system, GST system we have in Australia. But compared to Australian tax system, India's GST system seems to be very, very complex, extremely complex. There are different tax rates by the states. Different commodities have different tax rates. And so there will be, a lot of inefficiencies, distortions and also giving these different complexities, the administrative cost will be also very high. So given all these complexities, there will be a lot of loss of social welfare due to these complexities. So why India has such a complex system? Is it because it wants to increase equity of the tax system? Is that the reason, or something else? That why so many exemptions are given? So we have to worry about also how much is the social welfare loss. Okay, supposing we collect $1 or 1 rupee from taxation, then there will be loss of social welfare. So our objective should be to minimize that loss of social welfare. Because then we come to the expenditure side. When we have expenditure, then we have to recover that loss of social welfare because we are collecting $1, one rupee from the taxation, and then we have to invest put that money to the expenditures so that we generate positive social welfare. So that's a relationship between them. So first thing, we have to minimize the social welfare loss due to taxation. And also we have to maximize the social welfare because of the expenditures. So a lot of these trade-offs and all that creates many complications. So can this panel, throw some light on this issue?
Well, I don't know whether I can throw much light on this, but let me make the point. See, the point is that before the introduction of GST, we had several sales tax levied by the states, which at several rates, and you had the excise duty levied by the center. Again, broadly, they brought it down to 2 rates. In addition to that, at the local level, you had what they call the octroi or the entry tax, which is the tax on the entry of goods into a local area for consumption, use, or sale. Now, GST combined all these taxes into one tax, and in fact, you see, there was a tax on tax, markup on tax, tax on markups. And if you compare that type of a cascading tax system and then the reform that we did, so then you look at the welfare, possibly we have done better in terms of putting them together. And then of course, unfortunately, unlike in the private spending, here there is no quid pro quo, even in terms of the social welfare, in the tax system. So it is true that Indian GST, in fact, let me also mention to you
that 91% of the countries which have introduced GST since 2001 have a single rate. We know this. It is not that we do not know this. And then I think this many rates you can find only in India. That's because India is so generous. The point, so, and then of course, that's the reason why, and there is a beautiful thing my colleague and collaborator Richard Bird used to say. If while introducing a particular tax or measure, if you make a mistake, it's extremely difficult to correct it later on. And we have done this mistake. We have to correct it. That is the reason why we are saying that the second stage of reform has to come in. Instead of so many rates, you can gradually bring it down. Sort of you can rework and then bring it down to two, and thereafterwards you can see further. Now, earlier you had different tax administrations doing it. Now you have one GST tax administration, which is basically doing it. So there have been improvements, but then obviously, sort of, I am quite aware of, I was there when GST was introduced in Australia. I am quite aware of the controversies that went through even before introduction. That apart, now, as compared to many other countries, we have a very complicated system. It is true that the collection cost, compliance cost, and the cost in terms of the distortion are high, but we need to really improve it from here.
Sarah, you said there is an improvement from the earlier system, but what we already had a CENVAT system and a state VAT system. So that cascading part was taken care of to a certain extent with those two parallel value chains. After that, we integrated them. Now we have a GST. When we don't see any further increase in revenue productivity. So apart from integrating these two chains and having a concurrent administration, concurrent kind of a jurisdiction on the entire tax base, what is the additional improvement the current GST structure has brought about? As if you compare with the state VAT, CENVAT system earlier.
Sir, can
I ask a simple
Sachinand, you go ahead.
Uh,
Sachinand Mukherjee.
I just want to take this question of Professor Ravindranath. So what is the gain from the GST is that earlier the CENVAT system was cascading because CENVAT system was at the farm gate of the manufacturers. On that we used to add the state VAT system. So it is the same VAT paid value on that we were paying the state VAT. So it was cascading. That's the one thing. The services tax was only there's a cascading effect of services tax with the state VAT as well as the same VAT was part of the services tax. The credit was there, but there was no credit of the service tax service providers on purchases of state VAT goods. So see, there are lots of benefits of GST. We should not go through only the newspaper articles and that thing. There are lots of literature on that thing. Even I have written reams of paper on GST. Please go through it before commenting on what is the gain of GST and that. Coming to the point of just a second. Just a second. I want to point out one thing that the beauty of the Australian GST system. See, the Australians started the GST system at a very low rate of 10%. And entire proceeds go to the provincial government. Now, provincial government is not allowing the federal government to increase the tax rate by 1%. And there's a dire need of revenue in the Australia, and the Australian government cannot increase the revenue rate by 1%. That is the beauty of Australian GST system that we are talking about. Thank you.
Now, the immediate gain that has happened is that the movement of trucks, there has been somewhere about 15%, sort of increase in the faster movement of trucks. That itself has brought down a lot of. No, wait. It is not a question. It's a question of your check posts have gone. That's the point I'm trying to make. I mean, there are quite a few other things. I mean, most of us have written on this. I mean, we don't write to newspapers because sort of, this is not sexy for the newspapers. But the point is, there is plenty of literature to show this. And I would, if you want, I can give a lot of things.
So I very much appreciate what you're saying. The cascading on the SENVAT into, on the SENVAT states what on that services part has gone down. And also the interstate movement has got eased, because the central state tax used to be an origin-based tax. Now we have a destination-based tax, and the checkposts have gone. Those have been appreciated. But the point is that the GST as of now, it is not leading to any kind of additional revenue productivity it was supposed to create. That means the structure is, there are countries which have started from the low rate and still who have got higher revenue productivity. Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, there are many examples for that. So India should also be looking at those kind of restructuring, even though it is slightly difficult for the country, given the nature of the country. And then have a broader base. And you have talked about the threshold of registration threshold, being a high registration threshold, focus on those high industries. But we can have as Dr. Joseph was mentioning, there can be a lower threshold. Everybody will come into the tax chain, and then everybody will get input tax credit, and nobody will lose their business also if they are in the tax chain.
Now, I don't want to carry on with this, this discussion. I think it requires quite a bit of understanding of this, the tax system before we discuss this. And then I think we should also allow other people to ask questions. Huh?
Sir, the chairman talked about the data problem, but the chairman mentioned about the data problem in the public domain. But I have a question that is it specific to GST alone? Which if you are you getting sufficient data related to unemployment in the country? I think this is a general issue, not specific to tax alone. I think that is a general issue that we
the question was specific to the particular specific for GST, and the answer was specific. That's right.
This I am saying because when we try to do research, this we are facing a big problem. That I am raising.
What I would say in response is that the GST data, the details of it, if made available in a certain way, which I'm willing to discuss, can give us enormous amount of information on the economy, not just on tax. We can create a SNA at that regional level, which we were struggling. Okay. Yes, interstate trade can be handled very well. We can ask questions about efficiency, about supply networks, about all kinds of emerging networks of trade, commerce, build up, where value added shares we can ask. So we can also look at the frictions in the economy. Okay, Indian GST data will allow Indian social scientists to actually estimate the friction level in the Indian economy. Okay, and that would bring out all kinds of real waste which is happening. But that data must be made it. It's all there. It needs just two initiatives. One is for a HIPOD committee like people here to sit down and say, okay, this entire file will be shared with the names and these fields blocked out. That's all. See, which bureaucrat ever released data unless he was pressured? See, the data that we have, like ASI and so on, in the public domain is because some academics, okay, based in Trivandrum, in the CDS, based in Gujarat, in the GD, the Gujarat Development Institute, all of them put pressure on the government and made it available. Okay. I think we should follow a group. I just one agenda.
No, I think this is the time to talk to the revenue secretaries. Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to respond to Sri Narendranath's question on productivity. I just made some calculation. I just found out that the GST collection, this is based on RBI data, as percentage of states who own tax revenue has increased from 31.29 in 2017 to 43.11 in 23-24. So maybe I think it's increasing.
Anyway, I mean, say, let us not get into that. I mean, I think there are many other things that we can discuss. I mean, do we really need a higher productivity, revenue productivity? Yes. What needs to be done? We have to basically look at that. You know, sort of, will the increase in rate will increase the productivity? I don't know. No, I'm going to be very careful. I don't know. What ultimately you need to have a much better compliance of the tax and what needs to be done. I mean, now you have a lot of AIs coming up. There is a lot of digital payment that is taking place. You can estimate a lot of you can estimate the turnover of even the tender coconut fellow. So there is a possibility of bringing bringing in a lot more of technology in order to identify and then get sort of force a voluntary compliance, sort of persuade a voluntary compliance on that.
If I may. See, if you look at the GST rates, there are many areas. It's not construction was brought out, but there are many areas where the rate is 18% and 24%. Now, the point is from 18 to 18 and 24%, there are many items where these rates, in my view, are above what I would call the revenue maximizing rates. Okay. So when rate goes up, there is more revenue, but the demand goes down. So you put the two factors, it's like a monopolist pricing. So if you look at the revenue maximizing rate, set up a model and do the demand analysis, my sense is that at least 10 to 15 major products will show if you reduce the revenue, if you reduce the rate, the revenue to the government will go up and that will help in terms of product.
Now, in fact, this is one of the major recommendations most of us make, namely that you have what is called the fitment committee comprising of bureaucrats, joint secretaries at the union government, and some commissioners of commercial tax. They are the ones who decide what is the impact of a tax is and decide what the rate should be. And certainly, GST is an item where you need to have much better modeling to identify what is the revenue maximizing rate. And this should have a technical unit with both econometricians, then basic accountants, lawyers, and administrators put together. I mean, this has to work like that. I mean, that's one of the major recommendations most of the times we make. But recommendations have remained recommendations. Any other further? I don't think we can go on talking about the revenue productivity because it will be counterproductive. So if you don't have any more of questions, let me thank all the speakers for their wonderful presentation. Yeah.
Sir, I would like to add one point. Sir, already our focus is mainly on the rate restructuring. There are so many other complicated issues in GST that mainly you can see that there are more than 1,000 notifications issued it is in only CGST. See, Central Goods and Service Tax itself, there are more than 1,000 notifications. If you consider the state's notifications, it is more than 10,000.
You are right. The reason is first you have too many rates, too much of too many clarifications to seek. Secondly, you have 30 different laws.
Yes, sir. The
That's what I'm
complexity
saying.
of law is so high in GST. So that's why it is very difficult for the business people, very difficult for the taxpayers, and there are so much complexity, and the compliance cost is also so high. These issues are not addressing. Only we are focusing more on rate restructuring. I think that won't solve the problem. That's.
Thank you.
Can I?
Let me thank. Let me thank Professor Sebastian, Stanu Nair, my friend Sachi, Mr. Narendranath, and Madam Simeon, and of course all those people who have made very useful interventions in, sort of raising quite a number of interesting issues. It only says that GST is a work in progress, and the work on GST will continue to be there. And as Simon said, tax reform is not an event; it is a process. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
As we come to the end of the second plenary session, I extend our sincere gratitude to all of them who have engaged in this session. As a token of our love and appreciation, I would now request the esteemed chair, Professor M. Govind Rao, to present the mementos to Professor Sebastian Morris. Professor Stanu Nair. Sri K.G. Narendranath. To honor our chair of the session, Professor Govind Rao, I invite Professor K.J. Joseph to present the memento.
He's also for being our chair of the conference. He and I must tell you that Professor T.M. Thomasai said, for unexpected reasons, he couldn't be here yesterday and today. Actually, he wanted to be here. And these two are our conference chairs, and we're actually giving a lot of ideas. So.
Corporate chairs looking for a chair.
With that, I once again extend my sincere thanks to each of you and look forward to continuing this dialogue in the upcoming sessions of the conference. So we have the Public Finance Association meeting, which will be held here at 5:30 p.m. I request everyone to stay back. Thank you.
5:30.